The international terminal of Reagan International pulsed with the electric rhythm of a world in motion. Families, tourists, and business travelers moved like intersecting currents in a fast-flowing river, the soundscape filled with rolling suitcase wheels, overhead announcements crackling in multiple languages, in the blend of laughter, exhaustion, and stress. Beneath cold white overhead lights, the polished tile floors reflected this chaos like a living mirror. At one of the check-in counters, Calvin Brooks, a 78-year-old man with a dignified bearing, stood patiently. Despite the noise around him, there was a calm in his demeanor, like a seasoned tree weathering decades of storms. He wore a well-pressed gray suit with the collar slightly worn, a sign not of disrepair, but of use of life fully lived. His ebony cane, carved with the head of an eagle, rested against his side. To Calvin, the cane wasn't a concession to age, it was a testament to battles fought and overcome. In his hand was a first-class ticket to Washington, D.C., where he would be honored at the National Museum of Aviation for his groundbreaking achievements in aerospace engineering and military aviation. Beside him stood his 16-year-old granddaughter, Mila, her bright eyes flickering with a mix of admiration and restless energy. A canvas backpack sagged with weight on her shoulders, bulging with design sketches of experimental aircraft she'd drawn, inspired by her grandfather's stories. Wearing a green hoodie and with her curly hair tied into a messy bun, Mila leaned in and nudged her grandfather playfully. "When you walk on that stage, Gramps, you better be ready to sign autographs. First black pilot to break the sound barrier? People are gonna want selfies." Calvin let out a soft chuckle, his weathered face creasing into a smile. But his sharp, perceptive eyes flicked around the terminal, noting the subtle but unmistakable glances. A man tugging his roller bag gave Calvin a once-over before muttering to his travel companion, "What's he doing in the first-class line?" A young woman with earbuds glanced his way, eyebrows twitching upward before she turned away. These glances weren't unfamiliar. Calvin had seen them all his life, in flight schools where he was the only black trainee, in briefings where his ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else, in lineups for opportunities he had to earn 3 times over. The line inched forward. When it was finally his turn, Calvin stepped up and placed his ticket on the counter with quiet confidence. The flight attendant behind the counter, Michelle, according to her nameplate, had a forced smile glued to her face. She looked to be in her early 40s, with sharp features and her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. She barely glanced at Calvin before flipping the ticket in her hands, scrutinizing it as if it couldn't possibly be real. Mila sensed it first, the shift in air, the slight tightness in Michelle's posture. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at Calvin's suit, his cane, his dark skin. "This ticket's for first class," Michelle said, her voice icy and loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you sure it's yours?" Calvin kept his composure. Mila's face contorted in shock, but he raised a hand to quiet her. "Yes," he said, his voice deep, steady, and without apology. "The ticket was booked by the National Museum of Aviation." Michelle didn't respond. She simply narrowed her eyes further, then in a sharp motion, tore the ticket cleanly in two. The sound was subtle but carried like thunder. She let the pieces fall to the counter. "This ticket's fake," she said coldly. "People like you don't belong in first class. People like you." The words dropped like an iron weight. Passengers behind Calvin started murmuring. The man who had whispered earlier now shook his head. "I knew it," he told his friend. "Always making a scene." The woman with earbuds chuckled into her hand. Mila stepped forward, voice rising. "Excuse me? That's my grandpa's ticket. How dare you tear it up like that?" Calvin touched her shoulder gently. "Stay calm, sweetheart. That's what they want. Don't let them have it." But inside, his heart was aching not from rage, but from the familiar sting of injustice, of being reduced to nothing in public, again. He straightened and looked Michelle directly in the eye. "That ticket was legitimate. I want to speak to your supervisor." She sneered. "Go ahead. But you're not getting on this flight." As she turned her back, an older black woman with a vibrant red scarf stepped forward. She'd been watching the whole thing. "I saw everything," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. "That ticket was real. You tore it up because you couldn't stand seeing a black man in first class." Michelle rolled her eyes. "What do you know?" Mila pulled out her phone. "Good," she said, hitting record. "The whole world is going to see this." Michelle lunged for the phone, but Mila pulled it back. "Too late. It's already uploaded." Around them, phones emerged from purses and pockets. Cameras turned. Calvin stood tall, his grip tightening on the cane. His eyes didn't waver. The door to the terminal manager's office creaked open minutes later. Inside, Under cold fluorescent light and surrounded by outdated aviation posters, Calvin sat beside Mila and the woman with the red scarf, whose name, they learned, was Evelyn. Across from them sat Brett Conway, the airport's operations manager, wearing a shirt 2 sizes too tight and a demeanor far too loose. Michelle stood beside him, arms folded, her composure brittle. Calvin spoke first, his tone measured. I was publicly humiliated. My ticket was valid, and this employee decided it wasn't based on how I look. Mila jumped in, unable to hold back. She said, and I quote, "People like you don't belong in first class." Michelle interrupted. The ticket looked fake. He was making a scene. You tore it up before saying a word. Mila shot back. Calvin placed a calming hand on her knee. You didn't do your job. You acted out of prejudice. Brett leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. Let's not escalate this. Mr. Brooks, if you apologize to Ms. Evans, I can get you on another flight. Calvin narrowed his eyes. Apologize? For what? For being black? For having a first-class ticket at 78? Brett's smirk disappeared. Evelyn stepped forward. I watched it all. His name was on that ticket. You think people like us can't afford first class? Mila pointed to her phone. The video's trending online. Hashtag Justice for Calvin is going viral. This isn't going away. A knock on the office door. A young employee poked his head in, panic on his face. Mr. Conway, there's a crowd forming outside. Protesters. News vans. You might want to see this. Calvin sat silent. Brett, now sweating, glanced at Michelle. She paled. Then Evelyn stepped closer to Brett. You should know who you're dealing with. Calvin Brooks isn't just a man on a flight. He's the founder of Stratotech Aerospace. The jets you fly? He designed them. Silence. Michelle gasped. Brett's mouth opened, then closed. Calvin looked them in the eye. I didn't need to lead with my resume, because respect shouldn't be earned through fame. But now you know. A new presence filled the room as the door swung wide once more. A tall woman in her early 60s strode in wearing a black power suit, her silver hair immaculate. She moved with force and precision. Mr. Brooks, she said, stepping forward and offering her hand. I'm Dr. Naomi Grant, CEO of Stratotech Aerospace. Michelle stumbled backward. Naomi turned to Brett. You manage this terminal? Yes, Dr. Grant. Then explain why the founder of Stratotech was publicly humiliated on your watch. He tried and failed. Michelle opened her mouth to explain, but Naomi silenced her with a glare. You judged him by his appearance, Naomi said. You tore his ticket because you couldn't imagine a black man in first class. Mila's eyes burned with pride. That's my grandpa. He changed aviation. You tried to tear him down. Calvin stood. I don't want her fired because of your orders. I want her to admit she was wrong. Michelle, now trembling, finally looked him in the eye. I was wrong. I misjudged you. I'm sorry. Words mean nothing, Calvin replied. Change is what matters. Naomi nodded. Ms. Evans is terminated immediately. Mr. Conway, you're relieved of managerial duties. Stratotech doesn't tolerate this. Outside, chance of justice for Calvin swelled. Naomi smiled. Mr. Brooks, the museum is still waiting, and my jet is fueled and ready. Later, aboard the sleek Stratotech jet, Mila sat beside Calvin, sketchbook in hand. Grandpa, she whispered, why didn't you tell me you built Stratotech? Calvin looked at her, his eyes soft. Because my goal wasn't credit. It was flight. Flight for everyone. You still let them humiliate you, she said. Why not show your power? Power doesn't change minds. Hearts do. At the National Museum, Calvin's speech was short. I flew through sonic walls. Now we must break barriers of the heart. The crowd erupted in cheers. A year later, Mila stood at the front of a classroom, teaching aviation to kids in the very neighborhood her grandfather once called home. Calvin watched from the back, older now, but smiling as his granddaughter passed the torch, her voice alive with passion. At the end of class, a girl whispered, Miss Mila, I want to fly like your grandpa. You will, Mila smiled. But you'll fly higher. Calvin walked to the front of the room, his cane tapping rhythmically. Your wings, he said, are already growing. Just don't let anyone clip them. And with that, the man who broke the sound barrier left behind something even greater, a legacy that soared beyond the clouds.